There we go. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm very pleased to be with you. You probably don't know how pleased I on Monday night at midnight, your time, I got on an airplane, the first one in 4 days in California. And then with the enormous help of the association, I managed to get here in a car at 8 o'clock last night. So I may be a bit jet lagged, but I'll do my best this morning. As the title of my talk suggests, this title was suggested to me and I readily accepted it. I must say, if this topic was proposed as the subject of a debate and one was given a choice, which side of the debate one wanted to be on, I think it would probably be easier to be on the side of yes. The challenges are really quite daunting. But I think, as the title suggests, financial education and literacy is really quite important. And there is, as Minister Siniscalco just said, an enormous and growing lack of trust in the financial system, in part because of the crisis that we've just gone through. It's important because it will affect, I think, the first order, business is it will affect a lot of people's lives, almost everybody, in fact. But it also, if it's neglected, will adversely affect the profitability and performance of the industry that serves people. And so I think that's another part of the challenge. And ultimately, inappropriate or misguided investment behavior will affect the stability and performance of the whole system. But the title also just suggests that there's meaningful headwinds. Very significant ones. A non-exhaustive list would be that perceived and actual volatility, trust and confidence in the major financial institutions and regulatory bodies, a growing opportunity, but also a growing batch of complexity in the global economy and the global financial system. So I'll just spend a few minutes on Italian savers and investors. Some of this has already been covered, so I won't dwell on it at great length. Italians don't hold much debt. Maybe the government does it for them. They don't hold much debt, and they don't hold much debt on the real estate side. The debt has been rising, as you can see from this graph. These are all OECD countries. But Italy is getting up approximately to the low end of where most everybody else started some 20 or 30 years ago. Now, these numbers have shifted around in the last little while, but I think they're indicative of a fundamental difference. Why this is, I'm not really sure. It could be a matter of custom and culture, or regulation and or embedded risk aversion, or something like that. But it's a strength. I remind you that when the crisis struck, the principal channels by which financial and balance sheet damage reached the real economy were, one, the threat of a complete credit lockup, because all the channels of credit intermediation were failing simultaneously. And that was averted by very alert action by governments and central banks. But the second one we couldn't escape, and that was household balance sheet damage. And that turned instantaneously into reduced consumption, and then very shortly thereafter, reduced investment and employment. And we're still working our way out of that. We have, in virtually all of the advanced countries, elevated levels of unemployment, relatively high corporate profits associated with cost cutting, but nothing that vaguely resembles a kind of restoration on a kind of sustainable basis as opposed to a bounce back basis of growth. So I often say when I'm working in the developing countries, the one thing you don't want to do is end up in a situation in which the household balance sheets get badly damaged, because that will affect the real economy and people's lives more. So that's a great strength. The savings behavior is odd. When I first looked at this, I thought, gosh, this must be an Asian country. And, but it's not. Italian savings is very high. I don't think I completely understand this. There's a number of potential reasons for this. The decline is probably due in part to the life cycle savings associated with the aging demographics that are characteristic of many, many countries, advanced and developing. It's possible the denominator got underestimated in this calculation, and I don't know by how much. To me, this was initially surprising because you tend to see precautionary saving in environments in which there's a great deal of under-provision of social insurance, and that's certainly not true in this country. It's possible people haven't yet convinced themselves they can count on those social insurance mechanisms, but I'm not sure where to come out on the precautionary savings notion. Probably more plausibly, as has been already noted, you tend to get very high savings in an environment where the rates of return are relatively low, and that could explain part of it. And it's also possible, and what I'm about to say is controversial, it's possible that the whole system is configured in such a way as to make it possible for the government to run with relatively high levels of debt and finance that debt over time. And finally, I've been told this is plausible. There may be a very high bequest motivation, that is the desire to save not for oneself and one's retirement, but for one's children. Let me finally say about savings behavior that our ability, the economics profession generally, to explain intercountry differences in savings rates is very low, and those differences are enormous. You can see some of it on this graph, but if you had an expanded set of countries, you would see just enormous differences that can't be explained by even a fairly comprehensive list of factors. In terms of history, many of you know more about this than I do. I think that Italians several decades ago were investing in government bonds as the principal investment vehicle. The yields were relatively high. But prior to the euro, the investment environment probably didn't produce a whole lot of options that were alternatives for that. The euro brought inflation and government bond yields down, and it also vastly expanded the array of assets that are accessible to people without incurring currency risk. So the mutual funds grew, and I think, with a little more luck, things could have gone differently, but there were a set of fairly high-profile, somewhat different setbacks. The internet bubble, which was an example of irrational exuberance. 9/11 produced a fairly large pause in the global economy, starting in the American economy. And the present global crisis, I think, has shaken people's confidence and increased their sense of sort of general risk in the environment a great deal.